Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Mon nom est Hamid Jourjani et au nom du groupe de réflexion sur le Moyen-Orient, je suis ravi de vous voir et vous souhaiter la bienvenue à la 5e événement de notre programme pour cette année. Today's event features our distinguished colleague, Dr. Chris Kilford, a former Canadian military attaché in Ankara. And during this virtual event, Dr. Kilford will share some of his perspectives regarding the recent developments in Turkey and Turkey's multi-prong foreign policy in the Middle East, especially, which has created tensions with its closest partners, especially the United States and other regional players. Those who are from the National Capital Region and are members of the CIC know Dr. Kilford very well, but for those who are joining us from different regions, I would briefly say that Dr. Kilford is a member of the National Board of the Canadian International Council and the president of Canadian International Council's branch at Victoria, British Columbia. His doctorate degree was from Queen's University with a focus on civil-military relations in the developing world. And academically, he's a fellow with the Queen's Center for International and Defense Policy, and also he has some academic collaboration with the Canadian Forces College, where he teaches online courses focused on geopolitical issue. And he's a sought-after expert, subject matter expert, consultant, and he has appeared on a number of programs nationally and internationally. He has contributed to several books and also papers. And from what I know, that even today as we speak, there are invitations for him to join different expert committees. I won't go into details, but for the interest of time, I will now pass on the microphone to my colleague, Dr. Chris Kilford. Sir, microphone is yours.
Oh, thank you, Hamid. Thank you to CIC National Capital Branch in Ottawa for having me here, and Sam, who's doing all the technical stuff in the background. And I'm speaking to you today from Victoria, which is the traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples. And I'm sure if some of you have heard me talk about Turkey before, you'll know that I love speaking about Turkish issues, and it comes from a long background of having been posted there for 3 years. But previously to that, when I was doing my PhD work, also looking at the Ottoman period, civil-military relations, and Menderes and Adnan Menderes, who was the prime minister in the 1950s, and it's carried on since then. So here I am. I'm also Turkey was a big thing in our house when I was growing up. My dad's dad actually fought at Gallipoli in 1915 with the Middlesex Regiment, the British Middlesex Regiment. He survived, and he was eventually wounded at the Second Battle of Gaza in 1917, and sent home. And there I was, 100 years later, representing Canada as the military attaché in Turkey. And so it was kind of nice to have that link. And if there was a conversation icebreaker between myself and my Turkish colleagues, it was to talk about Gallipoli and what had happened there during the First World War. Now, if I was using some slides today, one of the things I would normally do is I'd put up a slide of the Ottoman Empire, circa 1700 at its height, when it stretched across much of North Africa, through the Middle East, of course, and into Europe. And then I would put up another map of the situation today. And you would see that that if you look at the past conflicts and you compare them to today, that not much has changed. And you find Turkey today, for example, in Libya, supporting the government of national accord. There are issues in the Mediterranean as countries vie for oil and gas. We have Syria, of course, a couple of situations there, the Idlib pocket. We have the Syrian Turkish border in the north. Turkey and Qatar, especially, being instrumental to helping Qatar during the blockade that Saudi Arabia and its friends had put on Qatar starting in you see, I almost said 1917, but 2017. Of course, that blockade has been lifted in Azerbaijan. And I say to audiences, if you could bring Mustafa Kemal Ataturk back to life, and Gertrude Bell and Lawrence of Arabia, and show them the map of all the conflicts in the Middle East today, you wouldn't need to brief them. They would understand immediately what was going on, and they would look at you and say, what has happened in the last 100 years? How come this hasn't got any better? So that's where we stand today when we look at the Middle East and Turkey's role there as well. So what I'll do this afternoon is I'm going to make some general comments about the Middle East and Canada's role there, and then we'll move right into the Turkish piece. I have quite a bit to say. There's always so much going on when it comes to Turkey, even if we just look at the last couple of days. For example, on Saturday night, late in the evening, Sunday morning, we had just over 100 Turkish retired admirals send a letter out on social media criticizing the government over a few issues, which I'll talk about. It's gone off like a bomb in Turkey. Today, we saw a record number of COVID-19 cases in Turkey, 49,584. It means that Turkey has the second highest case count in the world now, just behind India. And it's a case count that's going up, and it doesn't actually bode well for the average Turkish citizen. And of course, we also had the European Council president and the European Commission president in Turkey today, meeting with President Erdogan, raising issues of human rights. And of course, that usually doesn't go over well with the Turkish government when these issues are raised like that. So there's a tremendous amount even going on now, just in the last couple of days. But we'll come back to all of this and more, and we'll have time for Q&A as we move forward. So let me actually get into the meat of the presentation here by just saying that, from a Canadian perspective, we've been involved in the Middle East in one way or another for well over a century. You can go back to Gallipoli. The Newfoundland Regiment fought at Gallipoli in 1915. Many Canadians were part of British units and Australian and New Zealand units. But there were also 2 Canadian field hospitals on the island of Lesbos, providing assistance to those who had been wounded at the Battle of Gallipoli. So we had Canadians there through the Second World War. And then if you move into the Cold War period, we were often called into the region to diffuse conflicts that were involving our allies. And we have a couple of good examples. 1956, the Suez Crisis, of course, which was de-escalated largely by the arrival of a Canadian-led UN peacekeeping force. And then tensions over Cyprus resulted in the deployment of Canadian peacekeepers in 1964. And here we are today. We still have 1 Canadian peacekeeper on the island, and it's been 57 years. And as the Cold War closed, Canada was involved in the 1990-91 Persian Gulf War, and we were indirectly supporting the 2003 American-led invasion of Iraq. Now, there have been other circumstances where we've been involved in the region. When the Shah of Iran's regime, his government collapsed in 1979, our ambassador, Ken Taylor, managed to evacuate 850 Canadians. And in 1980, I'm sure many of you know this, he hid 6 US embassy diplomats for almost a year until he was able to get them out. And then we moved forward into 2006, Lebanon, another crisis. There were 39,000 Canadians registered at our embassy in Beirut, and in the end, we evacuated just over 14,000. So there's a couple of examples of our involvement. And then returning on to the military side in 2011, we found ourselves playing a leading role in the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi, and then, of course, calling for the downfall of Bashar al-Assad. Which led to us then in Iraq supporting the Kurdish Peshmerga, the Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga. And we're there now, and it doesn't look like we're coming home for at least another year. So for example, for the last few years, 2 years, we were commanding the NATO headquarters in Baghdad. We've just handed over command to the Danes, but we still have people there. And that NATO mission is expanding from 500 personnel to 4,000 personnel. So it looks like we're going to be in Iraq for some time to come. Now, besides these defense commitments, Canada has also been engaged from a humanitarian perspective and a diplomatic perspective in the Middle East for a very long time. So on the diplomatic front, Canada and Turkey established relations in the 1940s, and we followed suit with most Middle Eastern countries in the 1950s and 1960s, establishing diplomatic relations. But if you look at what, say, Freedom House has to say about the region today, every country in the Middle East is listed as partly free or not free, the exception being Israel, which is listed as free. So if you look at Turkey, for example, Freedom House lists Turkey as not free, mainly due, for example, its dealings with its own population very, very harshly when they criticize the government. And in the wider Middle East, we've had significant differences with Iran and Syria that led to the severing of our diplomatic relations in 2012. We've had a tough time with Saudi Arabia from time to time. But as I often point out to audiences, despite all this humanitarian effort that we spend in the Middle East, if you look at our international arms exports, not including the US, so if you just look at the rest of the world, 80% of our arms exports go to the Middle East. So on the one hand, we're trying to help out, but on the other hand, we're supplying quite a lot of weapons to the region. Now, speaking of Turkey and weapons, that our two countries enjoy, I would say, reasonably good relations. But in October 2019, Canada introduced an arms embargo on Turkey as a result of Operation Peace Spring, during which it was alleged that Turkey and its Syrian proxies had engaged in human rights violations while attempting to dislodge the Syrian Kurdish YPG from the Turkish-Syrian border. Now, in April of last year, this arms embargo was narrowed, but extended indefinitely on quite a number of Group 2 military products. And that included the sale of the Canadian Westcam surveillance and targeting pods, which Turkey has been using on its Bayraktar TB2 drones, and I should say very effectively on its drones. And we've really actually come down hard on this part of the arms embargo when it comes to the Westcam drones, especially following the fighting between Azerbaijan and Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh. So what we saw there was Azerbaijan using Turkish Bayraktar drones in the fight against Nagorno-Karabakh troops and Armenian troops. And, I would probably say that those drones were the key capability that led to Azerbaijan recapturing most of the territory that it had lost in the early 1990s. But because the drones were so effective and the footage of their effectiveness was being shared on the internet, there was a great deal of public pushback in Canada and in the UK that led to both countries coming down hard and embargoing the sale of any bits and pieces that go on drones. And it's proven to be Turkey has been quite clear with Canada that they're not happy with us because of us banning the Westcam pods and engines and so forth. We've also experienced very recently friction with Turkey because of our granting of political asylum to Turkish citizens. Now you have to, remember Turkey's a NATO country, we're allies, but we've been granting political asylum to Turkish citizens. Now why is that? Well, it generally stems from the failed 2016 coup in Turkey, which Turkey blamed on the followers of Turkish Islamic cleric Fethullah Gulen. And so what you have seen between 2017 and 2020 is almost 5,500 Turkish citizens have been granted refugee status by Canada. And this is one of the highest numbers for any country in the world. And not every Turkish person claiming refugee status is a member of the Gulen or network or a supporter, but it's safe to say that many are, and for that reason alone, Turkish applications have actually been fast-tracked. And what we have right now awaiting approval is another 1,349 applications for refugee status. I think for the Canadian audience, what's important, of course, is that Turkey does believe the Gulen movement was behind the 2016 coup attempt. They have labeled followers of Fethullah Gulen as terrorists, part of the FETÖ network, as they say. And so when you see countries like Canada and others granting political asylum to what they consider to be terrorists, then obviously they're not going to be very happy with Ottawa. Now, this 2016 failed coup attempt, which I believe was undertaken by followers of Fethullah Gulen in the armed forces, and believe me, there are lots of people that have differing views as to who was responsible. But look, I always say to folks, it doesn't matter who you might say was responsible. At the end of the day, a fairly significant portion of the Turkish military climbed into tanks, got into aircraft, and in the end killed roughly 250 of their own citizens and injured thousands more. So call it what you will, but it was an incredibly significant event, and it really scared people in Turkey. But it's also offered an opportunity since then for the Turkish government to crack down on its opponents. And so what you've seen is, 60,000 police and military personnel have been dismissed. 125,000 civil servants were dismissed. 1/3 of the judiciary was dismissed. Thousands more were arrested. NGOs were shut down. The list goes on. So the coup attempt and its failure certainly allowed the Turkish government to crack down on the Gulen movement and anybody else that it felt was opposed to them. What we've also seen in this period is the introduction of a presidential system in 2018, and we have President Erdogan, who was the prime minister, in power. This is centralized decision-making to a very high degree and marginalized the opposition as well. And when we look at the media in Turkey, it's safe to say that much of it is government-owned or controlled. And there's been a lot of backsliding when it comes to human rights. One example is the withdrawal recently from the Istanbul Convention pertaining to the protection of women's rights. And you've also seen a lot of tweets and other things going back and forth recently with both President Erdogan and Turkey's Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu describing, for example, the LGBTQ plus community as perverts and deviants in their tweets and speeches. And it's got to be incredibly demoralizing when you see your senior leadership acting in this way. Can you imagine if Trudeau was to tweet out something like, Prime Minister Trudeau was to tweet out something like that? Now, what does it all mean at the end of the day? Well, I would say that because of the harshness of what we see at times from the government, that the government's electoral fortunes are in decline, which may come as a surprise to some of you listening today. But if you go back to the June 2015 elections, the national elections, President Erdogan's party, the Justice and Development Party, failed to win a majority of seats in parliament. And we saw the mainly Kurdish HDP party enter parliament for the first time. Now, since then, the AK party of President Erdogan has been relying on the Nationalist Movement Party led by Devlet Bahçeli to maintain a majority of seats in the parliament. And we also saw in municipal elections in Turkey, the opposition winning in a very grand fashion in Istanbul and in other cities such as Ankara and Izmir. It was the first defeat for the AK party at the ballot box since 2002. So we do see some concern there by the government about their electoral fortunes. And we have new elections in Turkey coming up in 2023. Very important also because it marks the 100th anniversary of the Turkish Republic. And you can bet that President Erdogan will not want to see his party or himself losing that election. And I would imagine that if he was to be removed from party, and knowing Turkish politics like I do, there would be efforts to prosecute him and his family and his inner circle for various alleged misdeeds. I have to say, though, even though they've been in power for 19 years, the current government can still create a bit of energy and buzz. And you could see that at the latest party Congress. President Erdogan spoke for 2 hours. He pointed out, and I would say rightly so in many respects, all of the improvements that Turkey has seen in the education sector, the health sector, security, and well, perhaps not foreign policy, but there have been marked improvements for many Turks. If you consider that the AK Party came to power after the near total collapse of the Turkish economy in 2001. But you know, these days, if you look at the latest polling data in Turkey, the fastest growing segment in Turkish society are those that fit into the undecided voters category. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of the 2023 elections. Part of the problem that the government has, of course, is they're spread way too thin and they have lots on their plate. So let's take a look at that for a second. First of all, Turkey is home to 3.6 million Syrian refugees, and 500 children are born to those refugees every single day. So if you look at December 2019, when we have the most recent data that's available, so from 2011 to 2019, over 500,000 Syrian children were born in Turkey. And so this, as you can imagine, puts a tremendous strain on Turkey's economy and the people trying to look after so many people. Now, the good news, of course, is that so many of these young children are in school, but there's also another group of refugees that we can't forget about, some 400,000 Afghans alone and others. So despite monetary assistance from the European Union, this has been a tremendous drain on the treasury and the Turkish people. And if I can say this, if you look at the government's response, especially the provincial and municipal responses and ordinary Turks coming out to help all these refugees, it's been incredible. It's been outstanding. You just can't imagine what life has been like for the Syrian refugees, of course, and then to have Turks pulling out everything they can to help them. So it's quite the story. And I know there are hiccups. I see that in the news from time to time, but the overall story is incredible. Another issue facing the Turkish government is their relations with the United States, and one might say that it's at its lowest level for a very long time. And much of that stems around the purchase of the Russian S-400 air defense system. And what that meant was that besides Washington getting very angry with Ankara, the Turkish government was thrown out of the F-35 fighter jet program, and there's been a block on foreign military sales by Washington to Turkey. So now you have one of your NATO partners, other than Canada, with an arms embargo on you. And I think just as important and a big issue for Turkey is that the Biden administration, from what I understand, is preparing to recognize the Armenian genocide on April 24th, which is Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day. So that will certainly not go over well in Turkey. So the purchase of the S-400 has been a friction point with the United States especially, and NATO, of course. And we can talk about Turkey's place in NATO in the Q&A if you like. I won't go into any details on that right now. Now, as I mentioned, the Turkish economy, it collapsed in 2001, and the International Monetary Fund had to come in to assist Turkey get back on its feet. And since then, we've seen some impressive economic growth in Turkey. Turkey is a member of the G20, but the current economic situation is pretty worrying. If you follow the Turkish economy, the Turkish lira has been hit very, very hard, and at the highest levels of the financial side in Turkey, we've just seen a revolving door of of senior leadership, and this creates problems with foreign investors, as you can imagine. Now, will joining the European Union help to sort things out? Well, I don't think that Turkey will be joining the European Union anytime soon, certainly while President Erdogan remains in power. And I think it boils down to this. Ankara's current conduct, especially when it comes to human rights, it's in complete opposite to what the European Union stands for in terms of its values and principles. So if Turkey was to implement what the European Union wished to see, it would be a direct threat to President Erdogan. The checks and balances would return, and his power would be very constrained. So I just don't ever see it happening. Now, does it have to happen? No, not really, because there's a customs union between Turkey and the European Union, and 56% of Turkey's exports go to European Union countries, and 7% to North America. Very few exports generally go to Russia and to China. China is making inroads. There's a trade deficit of about $20 billion in China's favor, but their share of the Turkish market is very, very small. And Russia's share, which is fairly large, is mainly built around the supply of energy. So economically, the European Union, European countries, and North America are still Turkey's major trading partner. But I doubt very much that this will lead to moves to join the European Union. Now, both the European Union and Turkey meet as they are right now, and they do talk about this, and they talk about visa-free travel and so forth. And I remember being on a bus somewhere in Paris and a ticker tape going across the bottom. I think it was like 2012, and Turkey was about to be granted visa-free travel to the European Union, and of course, it never happened. There are other issues. For one, Turkey is at war with itself, and it's been fighting the Turkish Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, since 1984. And this has also led now to the government wanting to shut down the HDP as a political party in parliament. And we've seen, for example, also the removal of Kurdish mayors in the southeast following the March 2019 municipal elections. Most of the Kurdish mayors have been suspended and replaced by proxies who have then gone about removing Kurdish language signs, stopping services in the Kurdish language in the southeast, and so forth. We have seen the co-founder of the HDP placed in prison. That's Selahattin Demirtas. He's in prison still, despite Turkey's own constitutional court and the European Court of Human Rights calling for his immediate release. No, he's still there. And when I say Turkey is at war with itself, yes, against the PKK, but also against the Gulen movement. It's been well over 4 years since the attempted coup took place, but it's quite normal to pick up a newspaper and read that 200 or 150 members of alleged members of the Fethullah Gulen network have been arrested, and very often they're members of the armed forces. And I can just imagine what it does do for the armed forces, because already they've had to live through this coup attempt. Many were let go, forced into retirement. Many officers fled overseas or stayed overseas and claimed refugee status. But then you find yourself 4 years, 5 years after the coup, going to work and finding your chief of staff has been arrested, or some general has been arrested, for the morale of the armed forces, I can imagine that it's just actually quite terrible. And Turkey is also bogged down throughout the Middle East. I mentioned when I first started speaking, Libya and Azerbaijan, Qatar, Syria, and so forth. And people often ask me, is it some sort of grand Ottomanistic policy that Ankara has taken on? And I would say largely not. I think it's largely just been created by circumstances, and often circumstances that are not in Turkey's control. But I have to say, Turkey's rapid fire foreign policy U-turns have left everybody on edge. And it's just not a recent phenomenon. You can go back to the Second World War and move forward, and you are often amazed at the choices that are made. You know, I'll give you some examples. Uyghur activists who have sought safety in Turkey now worry that they could be turned over to China. Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, many of whom fled to Turkey after President Morsi was removed from power, have found a safe haven in Turkey, criticizing the government of General al-Sisi. But recently they were told by Turkey to stop what they were doing and tone down their criticism of Cairo, because Turkey was trying to repair its relations with Cairo. Perhaps they might wonder at some point if they'll be sent back home. And while publicly Turkey does take a stern view of Israel and champions the Palestinian cause, the trade between Turkey and Israel has been very strong, and it's gone up and up year after year. And sometimes the best way I can illustrate Turkish foreign policy to people watching the country or not that familiar with the country is to imagine you're holding a kaleidoscope, and you give it a twist every day. And when you look in, that's the foreign policy for the day. That's how things move so quickly when it comes to Turkey. And when I say that, I often feel that I'm actually being quite harsh, and maybe too harsh. You know, it's a cliche, but Turkey sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, and in a neighborhood that is incredibly rough and tough. And you do have to pivot quickly to protect your national interests. And I would say also that it's easy for me to criticize Turkey, but the West hasn't done Turkey any favors ever since the ill-fated 2003 invasion of Iraq and the mistimed withdrawal of American troops in 2011. The removal of the Gaddafi regime didn't help Turkey either, because Turkey had big business interests in that country, and it all got wiped away very quickly. And of course, this half-hearted attempt by the West to remove Bashar al-Assad failed, as we all know. It invited in various proxies and other countries to come in to support the government in Syria. And at the end of the day, the simple fact is it's geography. And yes, Turkey was involved in trying to remove the government of Bashar al-Assad, but they're the ones who sit on the border. They're the ones that had all the people flee into their country, and they are the ones who continue to struggle with the outfall of that conflict. Now, we could go on. There's always much to say, but let me sum up by just saying that I think Turkey's future decides on who it wants to belong with. You know, what kind of country does it want to be? What are the values that it will uphold going forward? And all of these will guide the country into the future. But until it can get that piece right, its relationship with the West is going to be really, really difficult. And we're seeing that even today. And we can talk about it more in the Q&A. And so I'm going to stop now, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris, for a very comprehensive analysis. We went through a number of things, from Canada's peace efforts in the region, and then all the exports to that region being primarily in the armaments and, of course, other commodities. The question that comes to mind is, and I have heard that from some Turkish colleagues, the reaction that we see in Turkey may be attributed to the European Union's refusal to accept Turkey, because it seems during the discussions, Turkey accepted a lot of terms and conditions and went through the preparations for the accession, and all of a sudden the rug was pulled. And that caused, it is claimed by some of the Turkish colleagues that I have spoken with, and that caused this knee-jerk reaction from the establishment. What are your feelings about that, or your perspectives?
Yeah, I think after the AK Party came into power in 2002, and President Erdogan moved in to be the prime minister in 2003, and what we saw after that, I think things were on track. I think things were going incredibly well, and then we saw things happen in the region. For example, one could point to the Arab Spring. Suddenly, the Arab Spring disrupts the entire region, and we find that Turkey is getting quite involved in the region. It's looking out for its own interests, of course, but we see their attention, the government's attention, being focused in other areas. We also, at this time, if we look at sort of 2012, 2013, 2014, we start to see the internal issues coming to the forefront. We see this fight begin with the Gulen movement, allegations of corruption against the government. We see the fight with the Gulen movement starting at that point, and we see the clamping down on human rights, the closure of newspapers, arrests, etc. And it culminates with the coup attempt in 2016. There's outreach to the PKK at this point. I traveled to Hakkari and so forth in 2013 when things were much calmer. We've seen the fighting there after that point in 2015 get a lot worse. So the human rights issue becomes a factor. And suddenly the European Union is looking and saying, well, we don't like what we're seeing. And oh, by the way, all of these refugees have flowed through your country, but 1 million have also come into Europe, and occasionally you're using them as a threat also. So you see, there's the breakdown. It's events move things off track. The other part of it too is, how serious is the European Union? I'm not so sure at times if they're really ready to swallow 84 million Turks moving into the European Union. It would make Turkey a major power bloc, especially with the departure of the British. It would make them a major power bloc. I'm not so sure they're ready to make that step themselves. And one final point I would say, when Turkey looks at the European Union, when Brexit was happening, the Leave campaign pasted these posters all over the UK saying, look out, 78 million Turks are about to join the European Union. And they were using it as a threat to garner votes for the Leave campaign. So now, if you're sitting in Ankara, you're looking at that and thinking, oh my gosh, this is what they think of us. And so therefore the appetite drops off a little bit too. So I think it works like this. Turkey pretends that it wants to join the European Union, and the European Union pretends that they want Turkey to join the European Union. And the fact is, it's not going to happen, I don't believe.
Thank you. On a point that you raised during your discussion, that about 500 children are born to the refugees, Syrian refugees, and also the Afghan refugees. To what extent government of Turkey has been prepared to provide citizenship to either Syrian refugees or the Afghan refugees and their children's?
Yeah, it's a great question. So very few, I believe just over 100,000 or so Syrians have been granted Turkish citizenship. So what it does mean is that all of those children are stateless. They're not granted Turkish citizenship. And of course, they can't get any sort of documentation from Syria. And Turkey has a very well-defined refugee policy. Syrian refugees, to simplify things, are treated in many ways as guests, with a view that they will eventually return back to Syria. And some have. And I think the Turkish government felt that more would. But that's certainly not been the case. And I think, at this point, all these young kids, there are roughly 700,000 in school, and now they're learning to speak Turkish. And I think for the Turkish government, at some point, they're going to have to say, these people aren't going home. We have to bring them into the Turkish economy, into Turkish life, and just go from there. Now, it does create problems because many of the Syrian refugees don't have the right documentation to work, and so they're working in the gray economy. And many Turks themselves work in the gray economy. And so you then find tussles over jobs, and wages are very low. And some, we have many cases actually where Turks are getting very angry about the presence of Syrian refugees. So it becomes very difficult to manage. But I think Turkey is a relatively wealthy country, but it's not rich. There are many poor people, and so for them to bring in that many refugees and house them and look after them the way they have, it's been quite remarkable.
Thank you. There are many questions, and I'll try to either combine them or be very short about the questions, because we don't have that much time. We have only 20 minutes left, actually 15 minutes. How do you see Canada-Turkey relations future in light of thriving relationship between Turkey and China in the recent years, and considering the fact that Canada passed a regulation about genocide of the Uyghurs due to China's human rights violations?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. So, trade relations between our Canada and Turkey are pretty good. It's about $3.5 billion in two-way trade. The arms embargo, of course, interrupts things, but generally the weapons sales are in the $100 to $150 million a year range, depending on the year. So it's not a significant amount. So Canada-Turkey relations are fine. Now, in 2004, when Canada did come out and recognize the Armenian genocide, it did cause a friction point between our two countries. But since 2004, many governments around the world, both at the federal and state levels and so forth, have recognized the genocide. So we're not one of the outliers. We're not one of the leaders on the file anymore. And I think in general, we've moved past it as a sticking point. But let's be clear. I mean, the Turkish government does not like this at all. And when it comes to China, our relations with China are difficult. And I think in some respects, Turkey's relations with China are as well. The two sides are still feeling each other out. And we saw just, I think today or yesterday, the Chinese ambassador to Turkey was called into the foreign ministry because some of the opposition parties had come out in support of the Uyghurs, and that had caused the Chinese ambassador to say something on his social media account, which was quite nasty, and the foreign ministry has called in the ambassador. So I think the two sides are still trying to feel each other out, and the Uyghur issue is certainly at the forefront because Turkey was very vocal about the treatment of Uyghurs a few years ago, a little less now. Some people point to the Belt and Road Initiative as being part of that reason. But I think China will, I'll carry on one more thing. I think China's had its taste of what it can be like to work with Turkey. Look, Turkey looks out for its own interests. Back in 2013, I remember my Chinese colleagues, the military attaché, was so excited because China was about to sell the S-300 air defense system to Turkey. It was like a done deal. We were breaking out the champagne. Well, they were, but all of a sudden the deal was off. And so, I think China will come to learn that Turkey looks out for its interests, and the relationship will not always be smooth.
Thank you. There is a question regarding the iron fist approach that we see there, and the other issue that you mentioned earlier, the letter from the Turkish generals. To what extent these two compromise democracy in Turkey, or have compromised already?
I'm not sure what the iron fist is in reference to.
It's perceived that the approach that Mr. President in Turkey has adopted, is being seen as very harsh.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is, and you only have to look on the Canadian government's website the travel advisory website to see that our own government advises visitors to Turkey not to post anything in their social media that's critical of the government. So you have to be very careful there. And certainly if you're a Turkish Canadian dual citizen, you could be in really serious trouble just for that alone. But now, here's the government. It's 2021, and on Saturday night, 103 or 104 retired admirals, the number varies depending on the report, let's just say just over 100 admirals, send a note to the government criticizing them for thinking about perhaps moving away from the Montreux agreement that regulates traffic in the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, shipping traffic, criticizing them for that, and also pointing out at the same time that there's this serving rear admiral who is seen in some sort of religious garb covering his uniform. So he's wearing like a fez, although it's not a fez, but he's wearing religious garments. Now, if I'm sure Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was turning over in his grave to see a serving member of the military in wearing this garb, and you can see the photos there. And this declaration or note by these retired admirals refers to that. And I think they're just quite angry about the developments that are occurring in the Turkish military, and worried that the military is becoming too allied with the government. And of course, it would be a concern, but it's an ongoing concern. It's something that we've seen, decade after decade. The military was hunting for Gulenist members in its ranks 20 years ago. And when Adnan Menderes became prime minister in 1950, there was a group of military officers there that were quite ready to align with him as well. And so these issues are not new, but if you're in the government, having survived that attempted coup in 2016, to see yet another group of officers coming forward, it unnerves you. And of course, what happens? I mean, these admirals, I really don't know what they were thinking, because 10 of them have been arrested. Others will probably be arrested. And it damages the morale, such as it is, in what's left of the Turkish armed forces, and puts everybody on edge. And again, from a foreign investment perspective, just one more thing to tick off and say, well, I'm not going to put my money into Turkey because I'm not sure where this country is heading. So I can just imagine, the reports that you're seeing in the media, it's an hour by hour thing to follow.
Thank you. Again, we don't have much time, and I combined two questions together. You have mentioned Gulen movement, and there are a couple of questions pertaining to that. I'll leave that to you to decide how you want to explain that. Apparently, they have been very active prior to the coup in Canada, and they were actually organizing events in Canada, in Ottawa. And now we don't see that anymore. The other question is pertaining to Turkey's relations with Iran. How do you see that, and how is it evolving? Does Turkey have a coherent strategy for this relationship, or are they just reacting to circumstances, as you said? So two questions in maybe a short period of time.
So the Gulen movement, of course, has its networks worldwide. And let's not forget that for a long time, they worked hand in hand with the Turkish government. They were a great soft power tool. Some of the best schools, hospitals in Africa, for example, were run by Gulenists. And we have obviously a Gulenist presence here in Canada. I know many Gulenists myself. It's really too bad that things have come the way they have, because it's really meant that the Turkish community is quite divided in Canada. And Gulenists worry that they're being spied on, or their families are in jeopardy back home. So it's not been pleasant for anybody to see what has happened. And certainly the Gulen movement is a lot quieter than they were before in Canada. We don't see any big Anatolian gatherings and so forth, festivals and so forth. When it comes to Iran, I find that relationship with Turkey to be very transactional. They help each other out when needed, and they'll oppose each other when required. They face off in Syria in some respects. They both have a hand in Iraq. I think the simplest way I can answer that is that the only thing that I've found that you can get the powers in the region to agree on, and that's Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. The only thing they'll agree on is that any move by the Kurdish populations, the Kurdish minorities in their countries to seek wider independence, they will get together collectively to put a stop to it. So I'll hold it. I won't say any more. In the interest of time, I could say a lot more.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption that I had. My phone was ringing. Now that brings us to the question about NATO. Would you like to elaborate on that, and how that relates to Canada and Canada's relationship with Turkey? Thank you.
Yeah, so NATO is a great question because there have been so many things going on in Turkey that people say, let's kick them out. If you look at many of the commentators in the United States, for example, that's all you'll see. You will hardly see anybody coming to Turkey's defense. And it is difficult to come to Turkey's defense at times when we do see what we see. But it's a strategic move, a strategic thing to have Turkey in the alliance. And I always take people back to when it all started. 1952, Turkey joins NATO. And they do so because they're worried about the Soviet Union moving into the Bosphorus, having their eye on that piece of territory. And it's a safe bet to come into the Western Alliance. And so there we are. It's 1952. But then 8 years later, 1960, we have a coup from below. Adnan Menderes is arrested. And a year later, he and his foreign minister and his finance minister, they're executed by the military. And then there are counter coups in 1962 and 1963 that fail. So look, you haven't been a member of NATO for very long, and you're already causing Brussels a big headache. And then you just move forward from there. The people that are watching probably are quite aware of the number of coups that have happened in Turkey. They are certainly aware of what happened over Cyprus in 1974 that led to the division of the island. Again, an issue between Greece and Turkey facing off against one another. This military coup in 1980 led to 3 years of military rule. We had we had 600,000 people arrested. 517 were condemned to death. I think in the end, 50 were executed. But again, Turkey is a NATO member. So you have to ask yourself, how much punishment is NATO willing to take when it comes to Turkey? And when we do look at current events, as ugly as they can be, I think that in NATO, they kind of look and say, well, we'll get through this. Turkey is a strategic country for us. We have a NATO headquarters in Izmir, a rapid reaction corps. Turkey's engaged in Afghanistan. So, you add up the pluses and the minuses, and you basically, I think, if you're in Brussels, are looking for the post-Erdogan period and what track Turkey might take then.
Thank you. And now, maybe related to this answer that you provided, you have already answered it. How do you consider that President Biden's not responding to Erdogan or to Erdogan's call? Could that be related to what's going on with respect to NATO?
Oh, I just think it speaks to the larger rift in U.S.-Turkish relations. There have been incidents in the United States with the Erdogan's bodyguards, the Halkbank case, Turkey and Iran, and the movement of money and gold. I mean, there are those issues. The S-400 issue is yet another one, and so it's definite snub. There's no getting away from it. It's meant to send a message. I just don't know really. I mean, I would imagine Turkey's very disappointed over not being part of the F-35 program, and being the subject of sanctions. And if the United States government, if the White House comes forward with a declaration about the Armenian genocide, I mean, this will just create massive waves. I think sometimes for us, we look at it and we go, oh, come on, what's the big deal? But for Turkey, it's an incredible big deal, and they will not be happy, and we will just have to watch how things play out after that.
Thank you. Just the last question. While you were there, what was your impression about the Turkish media, and how do you see it today?
So from the Turkish media side of the house, I thought it was actually quite lively, because you had newspapers like Zaman, for example, which was closed in March of 2016, but was a Gulenist newspaper. When I first got there in 2011, Zaman and today's Zaman were very pro-government, and over a few years they started to switch, and the tone became more and more critical. These days you find very, very few newspapers that are critical of the government. If they're allowed to continue, it's because their circulation is very low and then don't have a lot of influence, and it gives the appearance perhaps that there is a critical media still there. But you just don't see the kind of arguments that you see in our country, and maybe there's not room for that in some respects. It would be unwise for a political party, for example, to say, "Hey, we should reach out to the PKK." Now, the AK Party did try, give them their due. They did try to see if they could find a way forward on that situation, but they failed. But today, to have somebody say that we should reach out to the Kurds would not do well for you at the ballot box. So actually, at the end of the day, amongst the major parties, you do not find a heck of a lot of policy difference between them. It really comes down to the person as the figure that you're voting for.
Thank you very much, Chris. You have covered so many areas, and I have so many questions myself. It looks like we should have a second session dealing with Turkey and then delving more into the situation in the Middle East. But thank you very much for this comprehensive analysis. And we had a number of questions. I think we have addressed all of those. I can't open any more questions because we don't have much time. So I just once again, on behalf of the CIC National branch here in Ottawa, would like to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to join us and help us with the better understanding of what goes on in Turkey, and also the way we from Canada see the relationship that is emerging there between Turkey and other players in the region, and some of the issues that US and other NATO members may have with respect to relations with Turkey. I also would like to thank the participants who stayed with us and participated actively in this session with their questions. And I also take the time to specifically thank my colleague, Samuel Amoa, who is providing our technical support for all these events. And I guess I ask the participants who are not members of CIC, please consider joining the CIC, because it's through the membership that we can have these events organized, and we would be delighted to have you as our members. Once again, thanks, Dr. Kilford, and thanks to the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hamid. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
All the best.
Thank you.